I have
Have that on my list.
wonderful. I often forget to record things. So today we are going to begin starting with the basic welcome. Shannon did a little introduction, and I just want to say that I met Shannon when my practice was in a very different realm. I was working originally, I've been a dietitian for 10 years now in June. And when I first finished my internship and program at Tufts and came here, I had a practice that was really primarily focused on, I called it health, but it was primarily focused on helping individuals lose weight or get to the size of body that they wanted to. So the first 2 years, I really worked from nutrition and health from a very weight normative approach, which is really where the focus of health and well-being is primarily on the size of one's body and on one's weight. I will share that it became really disheartening for me after that time because it just, the ways in which I was taught to use nutrition and food to really were just to manipulate or try to the size of one's body was really challenging because bodies come in different shapes and sizes naturally, and bodies, as we move through different ages, stages, and phases of life, naturally change. So when the focus is primarily trying to control one's food and one body, when the evolution of one's body is going to change anyway, I became really disaligned with the work and actually started to see how it was really unhelpful. So I share that because today the work that I do, fortunately for me, is very different. And it is a different way of approaching health and wellness. And I also share that because today you may be hearing things that really conflict with how you feel or what you've thought or messages that you've had over the years. And I just want to share that as you notice those things come up, just gently notice those things and notice what's going on for you. And by no means is everything that I'm going to say going to resonate with you. So I just want to encourage you to take what sticks out to you, to take what you feel feels aligned for you, and to leave the rest. And just to have that in the back of your mind. I also teach a nutrition class at the University of San Francisco, and I teach it to nursing students. And a large part of what I do is I teach nutrition and health through a non-weight focused, non-diet approach. And it's possible to begin focusing on other health outcomes, which we'll talk about beyond the size of one's body, through behavior change and through different parameters. So it's really interesting to see just how ingrained all of these messages are, because when I go in there and start sharing some of them, it's really counterintuitive to what we've typically been taught in our personal life, and typically also too, especially in the medical realm. So there are also some accompanying handouts that I encourage you to look at. I know Shannon sent them out before, and I will send one more after this, as well as the podcast and the book Intuitive Eating, if you haven't heard it already or heard of it already. So I guess that I just want to start off by thinking about for yourself a little reflection. We'll just spend a minute, but I want you to just think about, in what ways has dieting or attempts to change your body size caused you suffering or pain? And this could be going back to messages that you received as a child, to bullying or teasing growing up, to attempts that you've tried now in adult life. But I just want you to take a moment and to begin thinking about, in what ways has dieting or that attempt to change the size of your body really caused any sort of pain or suffering? That's what I say. I guess I'll leave this. Does anyone want to share anything that's coming up? I know it's very personal right in the beginning, but if anyone does, you can read a little you can leave a comment in the chat box if you like, or if you actually press the space bar, that will unmute you on a computer, I believe. All right. We'll come back to this. We'll come back. So I think that it's important to know that you may think, what is intuitive eating? So intuitive eating is not something that I created. It is not something that is just out there. It is actually a evidence-based mind-body approach comprised of 10 principles. We're going to be going over some of the principles today, and there also is a handout that will really, really describe to you what the 10 principles are. I encourage you to take a look at that, but I want you to have in the back of your mind that really the whole premise of intuitive eating is about focusing on interoceptive awareness. So the idea of interoceptive awareness is basically going inside ourselves to pay attention to the cues that our body is giving us, and then removing the psychological blocks that are preventing us from responding to those body cues. So for example, if your body is telling you that you're hungry, and it's 10 a.m. and you just ate at 8 a.m. and your mind is telling you, no, don't eat. You just ate 2 hours ago, yet your body is communicating with you information that you're hungry. You feel the rumbling in the stomach. You feel the empty stomach and you want to eat. There's a disconnect from the mind and there's a disconnect from the body. So what we want to do is be able to connect back in with our bodies and respond to that body cue in a kind, caring, compassionate, timely manner. And then look at, well, what are the blocks that are preventing you from responding to that cue that your body is giving you? And I often say that a great example of a cue is when you have to go to the bathroom. When you have to go to the bathroom, we typically don't argue with ourselves. Do I have to go to the bathroom or do I not? Should I drink water so I don't have to go, or what's going on with me? Instead, what happens is that we will just respond to that information and we go to the bathroom and we go on living our life. So that is an example of interoceptive awareness. So connecting with the information inside of our body, and that can be an emotional cue like anxiety or stress, or it could be a body cue like physical sensations of hunger or fullness. So that's basically the big premise of this. When you hear intuitive eating being talked about, you'll often hear it referred to as honoring your hunger and honoring your fullness. There's much more to it than that, but we will be getting into that shortly. So there are two dietitians who created this, Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole. There's a wonderful podcast, which I will give Shannon to have you listen to, because Evelyn is so vibrant and so funny. She is the one who I did my training with, and she will just have you listening with all ears. So I encourage you to listen to that too after. And the other thing that's important to note is that it's a weight neutral model with over 90 studies to date. So again, intuitive eating is a personal process of honoring health by listening and responding to the direct messages of the body in order to meet your physical and psychological needs. Oh yeah, so I was like, I already had that in there, but we're still talking about this. So I shared that it is based upon interoceptive awareness, and interoceptive awareness is the awareness of inner body sensations. So what's going on for you inside your body? If somebody is struggling with binge eating experiences or overeating experiences, I'm so interested with what's going on for you inside during those moments. What's going on in your thoughts? What's going on in your body? What's going on around you? What do you notice? So really being able to tap into what's going on for us, and then cultivating and developing skills to respond to that information over time. And it can be as simple as deciding whether or not you want to have a kale salad and salmon, or whether or not you want to have pizza and a Caesar salad, so which one feels more appealing? That process alone may sound simple, yet when it's filled with all these ideas of what we should or how we should be eating, it disconnects us from our true hungers and our true desires and what's going on for us. So it is based upon this idea of attunement. So attunement with food, mind, and body. So again, what that means is that when we can learn to respond to our hunger cues, we eat when we're hungry, we stop when we're full, we have what we want to eat. It sounds so basic. And because it is basic, yet there's a lot of work to be done around this, because we've often been disconnected from our bodies over years or time periods, and those basic eating skills that are so intuitive for us become non-intuitive. And it's really, really interesting to be digging in deeper and see what are those reasons why that has happened for you over time. So really the idea is to connect with this food, mind, and body piece and begin to cultivate awareness and curiosity instead of judgment for the experience that it is that you're having. So if you, at the end of the day, decide that you want to have cake, instead of having this internal war with cake, we just eat cake and we move on. And we see that this happens with children who typically have sugar not allowed for them, or certain foods not allowed. When they go to other kids' houses for sleepovers, or they have it in the house, typically that's when you see the overeating of that food, or the binge eating, some may call it, or hiding candy underneath their bed because you don't know when you're going to have it again. So really interestingly enough, when we begin to think about some of these worries that we have with food, we begin to see it's the restriction and the deprivation really that fuels the kind of preoccupation around food, or often too the preoccupation with the size of our body. But beginning to think about, for you and your own experience, being able to pay attention to thoughts. What are the thoughts that you're having? What are the emotions and feelings, body sensations? And then how do you want to decide to eat and respond to food? So on the podcast that Shannon was referring to, she was talking about the question I got asked was emotional eating a good thing or a bad thing? And that was a big question. And I had to say, I don't think it's a good or it's a bad thing. It's just a thing. However, what we want to do is we want to begin to cultivate the awareness for ourselves of what's going on in our experience emotionally. And then how do we want to respond to that? So if you are having major anxiety every time you go to the store because everyone's wearing masks and there's no bread and they know what's going on, that's the time that we need to use some of our tools and to calm the body down, to calm the nervous system down, and then think about how do we want to respond to that. And I think it's really interesting because right now we're going through a time period where, when I say often it's restriction or deprivation that fuels the preoccupation with food, or perhaps there's many things that do, perhaps the overeating experience, we begin looking at what happens now when we think that we're not going to have food or we're not going to have something. And I look around at the world and I think if there's ever a time that's a concern, look at what happened with paper towels. What happened with toilet paper? What happened with the bread aisle? When we begin to think about that we're not going to have something, that's the drive to want to have that thing consistently around, or to hoard it. And with food, we think about the binge eating piece of it, or the overeating piece of it. Or sometimes it's the restricting too. But beginning to think about for you and your own experiences, what's going on for you and how do you want to respond to all of these things? And that's really the work. Now, the thought piece, there's 10 principles involved in intuitive eating, and it's broken down into thoughts, emotions, and also body. So I'm not going to go in depth in each of these principles. The book Intuitive Eating is fantastic, and I think that it will provide much more depth than I will be able to provide today for you. But to begin thinking about some of these principles, the first one is rejecting the diet mentality. And this is really important because if we're so focused with body size or weight, then we're disconnecting, or we're sometimes ignoring the cues that our body is sharing with us in an effort to get to something that we want to be, or get to where we want to be. So there's that disconnect there. So really hearing this idea that, yes, in our society, in our culture, wanting to be a certain size, wanting to be a certain shape, wanting to lose weight, that's unfortunately the norm. I have never seen, unless it's at rock bottom and people are so tired of having the yo-yo dieting and all of that, you have to get to that point where you're like, this is not how I want to be living the rest of my life. So thinking about this piece of rejecting the diet mentality, you can still want to look a certain way or still want to be a certain size. That's part of being human. But how, anyway, can we hold space for that and take care of ourselves? Making peace with food is another part of intuitive eating. And what this is really saying is when all food is neutral, then you get to decide what you want to eat. So what I mean by that, if there's no good or bad or no healthy or unhealthy, now I'm not saying that different foods don't have different nutrient values, because that's not true. But what I am saying is that when we can really give ourselves the ability to connect with our body and experience what we actually want to be having, connect with that part of ourselves, there's more autonomy in the choice. it's interesting actually, because dieting has a 95% failure rate, meaning that, and I didn't make that up, it's actually in the research. I've had to do all this research now that I actually teach a nutrition class at USF. Everything I say, I'm really, not that I wasn't before, but it's extra to a T. But 95% of individuals who do go on intentional weight loss efforts, they regain all the weight back, if not more, within 5 years. That has to do with weight science and hormones and a lot of different factors that we're not going to have time to go in today. But it's really interesting because what happens typically is that the blame is placed on the person that they're not doing something right. Yet when we look at the actual weight science, that's not actually the case. The body is set up to actually be prone to storing fat and storing energy rather than losing weight. The number one thing to decrease our metabolism is actually dieting or caloric restriction. So that's a fun fact. Maybe not fun. It's actually unfortunate, but hopefully you understand my intention. So principle 4, challenging the food police. That's really letting everyone's comments about your food just be their comments and checking in with yourself, respecting your body. So what does that look like? To feed yourself in a way that feels good, to move your body in a way that feels good. So really giving yourself also the ability to rest. Feelings, coping with your emotions with kindness. We'll definitely go into this today. This is an interesting area for many individuals. And then body. So the body is definitely involved here. So these are other principles involved in intuitive eating. Honoring your hunger, respecting your fullness, discovering satisfaction, movement to feel the difference, and then honoring your health as gentle nutrition. So gentle nutrition is definitely a part of intuitive eating. All of this is really about honoring health in a sustainable way, and this is something we'll look at too. So really, when I think of diet mentality, not many people have heard of this before. I think you'll understand it as we go through some of these examples. But when we think of diet mentality, we think of foods being good or bad, you feeling good or bad based on your food choices. In my experience, when this happens, this leads to more shame, more overeating, or the restriction and then the overeating. Relying on external cues to feed your body instead of internal cues. So if we think about in the beginning how I was talking about if your body's telling you you're hungry but your mind's telling you don't eat because you're following a new diet program, that usually gets us nowhere very fast. Counting points, calories, and macros, because again, remember, that's putting the focus externally instead on your internal body cues. Constantly looking for the next best diet, living with a restriction mindset, feeling like you have to work it off. All right, so this is something that I will typically show people when we look at this diet binge cycle. Start new diet, feel deprived, intense food cravings and urge to eat, break diet and binge, feel out of control and guilty, want to regain control, start new diet. So I'm always curious that when people really see this, there's usually, oh, I understand that, or I get that, or I've heard that. And really, it's really interesting to think about in your own story, if you think back to your own family lineage or your own experience growing up, how food and diets were talked about or what you were exposed to. So body cues is a big part of this work. And again, as I shared, that when we're in diet mentality, we can miss those really important cues. So if you are trying to not, let's say, binge eat or to restrict in order to look a certain way, and yet you're hungry, again, we're ignoring those body cues. So every time I want to share that we honor a cue that our body is sharing with us and respond to that cue in a caring, timely manner, we build trust with our body. And again, we don't question when our body tells us that we need to go to the bathroom, but we will often question and sometimes try to skip or delay our hunger. So this is something that I often share with clients and individuals, and just to begin tuning into your body. So often when we end up over here in painful primal hunger, we then get over here to painful fullness. So if this works, I know it doesn't feel good for people, but I say, great, awesome. Because you know what that means? That means your body is working for you. If our body is really hungry and you're down here, you are setting yourself up to be over here. So really what we're doing is we're tuning in to think about how hungry are we? And then after the eating experience, how do we feel in our body? How does that food make us feel? And what we're doing here is we're building attunement with our body. So this way of looking at and thinking about food is really helpful to begin cultivating that interoceptive awareness that we talked about. In the beginning of every session that I have with clients, I will begin some sort of self-compassion meditation along with having them check in with how are they feeling on the hunger fullness scale, because a lot of times there's a disconnect and they have no idea. One of Evelyn's tools that she often uses in this work is the 3-bite technique. So checking in with yourself before you have a meal. What are you hungry for? How hungry are you? Where are you on this scale? And then checking in with yourself in the middle of the meal. How are you feeling? Is the food still tasting good? Are you enjoying what you're eating? And the check-in in the middle of the meal is not so you stop eating. It's so you can just tune into your body and then decide how you want to respond to that information. And then checking in at the end of the meal, so how did that feel for you? Was that satisfying? So building some awareness with food, your body, and yourself. This is just more of that idea of when we end up in restriction, we then end up over here with binge eating. Deprivation can lead to rebellion. Dieting can lead to overeating. And this is something that I see again and again in my work. And sometimes I want to share, it's not actually even, you're not restricting yourself. However, it's the mentality around, oh, I shouldn't be eating that, or, oh, I can't have that until X, Y, or Z. And that's where we begin to start seeing some weird, funky relationships with food that disconnect us from our body. So body cues, really, what they do is that they show us that our body is talking to us. I have extreme anxiety typically before doing an in-person talk. So actually it's nice for you, not extreme, but I have anxiety. So it's nice for me to be doing this like this. And so that's a body cue. If you think about it, when we feel anxious and our heart is beating or we're beginning to sweat, we then need to take some deep breaths, calm the central nervous system down, reconnect with our body, and then we respond how we want to respond, or we can really approach something in a more responsive way. So a lot of this too is thinking about for yourself, how do you need to get your needs met and how do you want to respond to what's going on for you? Now, you may say, but I don't have body cues, so how can I be doing this? And that's a great question. And I want to share that this is very normal. It's very normal if you've been dieting or if you've been in a lot of chaos or stress, especially if you're a sensitive person, to have these cues disappear. So the first reason that I typically see this is numbing. So a lot of times clients try to trick themselves into feeling full with liquids such as coffee or tea. Dieting over time, the more you diet, the more those hunger cues are not going to be present. Chaos and stress. So if you're constantly stressed, then that's a really, really powerful way to have those sensations in your body be dulled. Or maybe they come when you're super ravenous and you're in primal hunger and then your body is set up to want to eat. Or skipping breakfast. So a lot of times people say, oh, I'm not hungry in the morning. And we take a look at it and it's like they haven't been eating breakfast for years. So, and then they get really hungry maybe around lunch. And then there's this huge dinner. And then it's, oh, I ate too much. And then I can't eat the next morning. And then we're in this cycle again. So we really want to begin working with the body, having our body be fed frequently and consistently and begin to respond to those cues in a way that feels good for us. So every person is different, right? But what I will say is that our bodies really like a schedule. They like a pattern. So I typically say eating something, it doesn't have to be huge, but within an hour of waking up and every 3 to 4 hours after that. If you go 5+ hours without eating, then your body is set up to want to have an overeating experience. So that's a really important thing to keep in the back of your mind. And the other thing to keep in the back of your mind is that you want to give your body time to kind of regulate to what's going on and know that it's much easier for us to feel hunger than it is to begin feeling fullness, especially if you feel like disconnected from your body. So it's something that we have to bring awareness to and cultivate. And it's a practice, and there's no such thing as being a perfect intuitive eater. That just doesn't work. There's no perfect with eating, right? So beginning to just get awareness around what's going on for you and your experience. And this will change too. So if you get up at 5 a.m., you probably want to have breakfast at 6. Then maybe you have a snack at 9, and then or another mini breakfast if that's what it looks like. You have lunch at noon. Maybe you have a snack at 3 and dinner at 6. That would be a normal eating pattern, normal pattern of eating. If you're getting up at 6 and eating at 7, like having one snack at like 10 a.m. and then eating at 8 p.m. and you feel like you're eating so much, well, then that makes sense because that's a really long time. It's like over 8 hours without eating or fueling your body. And that's not how our body likes to work. Interestingly enough, there's a hunger hormone called ghrelin, and every 3 to 4 hours when the food empties from our stomach and our food in our stomach is empty, that's when that hunger hormone increases. So the body, if we begin looking at the physiology about the food in the stomach and the hunger hormones and how it all works, it all beautifully works together when we become attuned and we begin thinking about it in this way. Again, if you want to just for right now, just yourself, do a little check-in and see where do you currently fall on this hunger scale? Where are you? So I just encourage you to just take a couple breaths in and out and just see where do you fall currently on this scale. And then my second question is how do you know this? How is your body sharing this information with you? And this is interesting because you may find that you feel lightheaded, maybe you feel a rumbling in your stomach, maybe you just start to get grumpy, but beginning to think about how do you feel hunger in your body and how do you know when you've had enough to eat? Really simple stuff, but really, really profound when you begin utilizing it in your daily life. So satisfaction, this is another big piece of intuitive eating. This is straight from the book Intuitive Eating, but it's a beautiful quote that the Japanese have the wisdom to promote pleasure as one of the goals of healthy living. In our fury to stay or become thin and healthy, we often overlook one of the most basic gifts of existence, the pleasure and satisfaction that is found in the eating experience. When you eat what you really want in an environment that is inviting and conducive, the pleasure you derive is a powerful force in helping you feel satisfied and content. So I want to also share that there's a really big difference between feeling satisfied and feeling full. So you could go and eat 5 cups of broccoli and come back and tell me that you feel very full, yet you don't feel satisfied. And isn't that fascinating? I think that that's so fascinating when we begin thinking about that. Oh my gosh, I could eat all this yet not feel satisfied. So when we can begin to think about and have what it is that we really want to eat, that's a really interesting thing. Usually it's almost like a light switch has gone off. We're not being preoccupied by food. We're just eating what we wanted and moving on with our life. It sounds so simple, yet it's become so complicated over the years, but it's really interesting stuff. And I think the other thing to keep in the back of your mind is that what sounds satisfying to eat changes day to day and in our day. And sometimes what's possible or what you want is not possible. So we just do what it is that we can. You may right now with COVID not be able to go to the store and get what it is that you want to eat. So then you have to eat something else that you have at home. So part of this too is being flexible, because when we have a flexible mindset around food and also in life, it's so much easier. But when we eat in attunement with our body's cues and bring satisfaction into the mix, we nurture a healthy relationship with food, mind, and body. And that is a really, really, really important point to this. So these are some things to consider. My husband asks me every night, what do I want to have for dinner? I'm like, oh. So, I think that part of this too is also just understand that, there's some times that we just have to eat and move on with our life. And there's other times where we really can consider these things more. So some things to consider is the taste. Do you want something spicy, sweet, or savory? The texture. Do you want something creamy, crunchy, or chewy? The aroma, do you want something warm or do you want something non-aroma like a turkey sandwich? The filling capacity, this is something that I encourage you to explore with because this is important and this is wonderful self-knowledge that only you'll know about your body when you begin practicing, but thinking about when will be the next time that you have a chance to eat. right? So you kind of have to pull from your brain here. What do I want to eat? What's practical? What's around? How long do I need this food to fuel me for? And then thinking about, do you need something simple, like just a little snack because dinner is in an hour and you're ravenous right now, and if you get to dinner, it's going to be like explosive? Or do you need a real meal because you're going to be in a meeting for the next 4 hours? So really tuning in and exploring with, what does your body need? Temperature, do you want something cold, hot, or neutral? Appearance, do you want something visually appealing, or are you just in your car and you need to eat a wrap or a burrito because you don't want to get too hungry? Or volume, do you want something lighter in volume like a salad or airy cheese puffs, or something more dense like pasta or a hearty bean stew? So if you again begin thinking about this, I'm actually really hungry as I'm giving you this conversation, so I didn't plan properly for this, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I do not want a salad. I need something hearty and filling. And I'm thinking about pasta. So if you begin thinking about, when this is an element of self-care, we can begin tapping more into our internal worlds and our internal experiences, and then exploring with those externally, so we're in attunement with our internal selves and external selves. So, thinking about, what does satisfaction mean for you? Okay. So making peace with food, this is just calling a truce, stopping the food fight, giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. If you tell yourself that you can't or shouldn't have a particular food, it can lead to intense feelings of deprivation that build into uncontrollable cravings and often binging. When you finally give in to your forbidden food, eating will be experienced with such intensity, it usually results in Last Supper overeating and overwhelming guilt. So this is actually a really interesting concept that I see a lot in the work that I do, and with individuals with all types of eating experiences and disordered eating, or just normal relationships with food, or eating disorders. I mean, all forms. And really this idea of making peace with food is that no food, unless is what Evelyn will say, no food unless you robbed it, is a bad food or has moral equivalency, right? So it's just, food is food. And when we think about, what does this mean? Miriam, you were getting to the beginning. Miriam is a psychologist, psychiatrist. I'm not sure which one, I forgot. Psychologist or a psychiatrist doing a lot of work right now. And she was saying in the beginning, before we got into today, that her experiences around being COVID at first were a little more, I'm going to put in words here, but this is my perception of it, a little more jarring. And now she's becoming more habituated. She's getting used to what's around her a little bit more. And we begin seeing this too when we think about food. And I want to use this example of the I love you. We can think about this too in our own relationships. So if you're in a romantic relationship, or if you've ever been in one, if you think about the first time that your partner said I love you to you, that probably felt really good and really elating and exciting and new. Yet like the 600th time, or the 3,000th time, or 20 or 5 or whatever years later, that does not have the same effect. And so what we begin seeing is that this is the same reaction a lot of times with food. So if we have not allowed ourselves to have something, then it's very normal once we start eating again to feel like, oh, we're going to go crazy with it. We can't control ourselves. But over time, the more we have that, it just becomes another option for us to eat, and it doesn't become so forbidden, right? So we see this, actually, there's this study, and it revolves around pizza and college students wanting to have pizza. And then what happened with this study is that every day, I don't know if it was all of their meals or just their dinner meal, but either way, they had pizza for a month like that, whether it was for all of their meals or just one of their meals. And then they didn't want to have pizza for a very long time. So we begin understanding that as we begin allowing foods to just be foods, and not having this good or bad, or we can just tap into what do we actually want to have, and we eat the food and we move on, it becomes less of a big deal for ourselves mentally, and typically also for ourselves in our body experience. So what we do know, and you've heard me talk about this quite frequently, is that through research, we know that restriction increases the likelihood of binge eating, food cravings, and disordered eating symptoms. So whether that be caloric restriction, restriction of specific foods, or diet mentality thoughts around foods, like, you shouldn't be eating something. Now, people also often ask me about sugar, and it's interesting because they quote this sugar study showing that that the sugar reacted the same way as cocaine did in the rats' brains. And what's interesting about the study that's not really looked at is that these mice or rats were fed sugar intermittently. So what that means is that they were given sugar and then it was stopped, taken away, given sugar, taken away, given sugar, taken away. And that over time, that caused this effect to have areas of their brain light up that would also signal parts of their brain that also lit up with cocaine in addiction. But what it was also interesting in that study is that things like babies and things like hugs have been shown to light up similar areas of the brain. So when we begin really thinking about some of the research that we've been shown from food in certain studies, we begin seeing, what's really going on here? But the biggest thing that you will see is that the restriction or deprivation fuels the preoccupation around certain foods, and then we begin seeing this type of pendulum effect. And what needs to happen here is kind of the normalization around food, feeding your body consistently and frequently throughout the day, tuning in to what do you actually want to be eating. Like, how hungry are you? Are you full? Taking care of yourself. How do you want to move your body? So begin forming a connection back with the body and making food neutral. So when we can do this, I can actually then have this conversation with you and be like, yeah, I think I want some pasta and a meat sauce, instead of feeling guilty if I need to have a salad or a salmon, right? So really begin tuning into what does our body need and connecting the dots, not just with the body, but with the mind, body, and food. And I often say that when food is neutral, so is our reaction to it. So if you in your own personal life have guilt around a certain food or an eating experience, that usually means that there's some sort of rule around food that you have or that you are holding on to. And usually these rules are very ingrained, whether that's you shouldn't have carbohydrates at dinner, or whether that's you shouldn't eat past a certain time, or whether you should drink water to see if you're really thirsty instead of hungry. I mean, all of these are food rules that are trying to deconnect us from our body. So instead, what if you were hungry and you ate? I mean, it sounds so simple, but that's where we begin seeing nurturing a healthy relationship with food and stopping the war between our mind and our body, and really just learning how to respond to our body. And that is a sustainable way. So thinking about what are your food rules? Like, what was it like for you growing up in your home? You know, for many times, I'm doing this right now with my students, and health and weight, being that if you are in a larger body, then you have to be then you're in an unhealthy body. Those two things are so interconnected, and they're not the same. So size of one's body does not determine health of one's body. And that's really interesting to see. So what I'm saying there is thinking about, well, what are their actual labs saying? What is somebody's cholesterol? What is somebody's HDL? Like, what is somebody's ability to kind of look at their oxygen consumption? So really actually understanding, and I have a couple fantastic articles if you are interested in them on weight and health that really are just fantastic. So I'm happy to send those too. And they're going to do much more service than me trying to explain this right now. But I want you to think about, what are your food rules? What foods would you like to be able to enjoy? If you have guilt around certain foods, where do you think that's coming from? And what are your vulnerabilities? And vulnerabilities here, this could mean, this really means, I use this in a way when somebody is having eating experiences with food that don't feel aligned for them, thinking about what set you up to be in that place in the first place. So maybe it is going too long without eating, maybe one of your vulnerabilities, or maybe it is not having what you really wanted to eat, or maybe it was that mean comment that you thought about from a friend, or whatever it may be. But beginning to do some exploration about, what are your vulnerabilities that are preventing you from having the relationship with food that you want to be having? So these just some basic reminders, or not basic, they're important ones, but just really beginning to think that food is neither good nor bad. Food is just food. Restriction disconnects us from our body, and interestingly enough, it is the number one thing that slows our metabolism. The more that we restrict, the more the metabolism slows to try to preserve everything that's going on in the body. And yeah, so it's really interesting about the weight science and how that works. And also it increases likelihood of binge eating. You get to define what a healthy relationship with food looks like for you, and what's healthy will change depending on the context and your age, stage, and phase of life. I now have a 1.5-year-old, and thinking about what does even my movement routine look like compared to before having a child. I mean, it's just so different. And so really having to think about, like, what does health look like for you in this age, stage, and phase of your life? So this is a handout that you have. We're not going to spend 3 to 5 minutes reading through it today, but I do want to encourage you to look at this handout. I will show it to you here. These are some of the handouts that Shannon sent in that email, but this is the handout that I'm referring to. So I encourage you, after this presentation today, if you feel called, to think about how has dieting impacted various areas of your life. Okay. So let me go back. We're going to go back. We're going back. We're here. All right. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about emotions and hunger. I will say that a lot of times I have people share, oh my gosh, I'm just an emotional eater. I can't control myself. And I want to first identify something that's important to note. And that is that intense hunger and emotional eating are often confused, because when you're intensely hungry, I don't know about you, but in my personal experience, I've heard this from many people over the years, that primal hunger feels really urgent. It feels emotional. So if you're in this place, that would make sense. If you've gone over 5 hours without eating and you're starving, it feels urgent. And so I'm always interested, when we first begin doing this work, to look at, well, what are your eating patterns? Are you actually eating enough? And every few hours, are you going a really long time without eating? Because that's going to also feel very emotional. So again, how do we avoid primal hunger? Eating enough food, feeding your body consistently and frequently throughout the day, eating enough carbohydrates. I'm going to tell you this was shocking for my students, but this is true. The brain alone needs a minimum of 130 grams of carbohydrate a day to properly function. That's about 8.5 slices of bread. The brain primarily runs on glucose, so the brain is not going to run on anything else unless it absolutely has to, which will begin breaking down ketones. But if it begins breaking down ketones, then it's also going to begin breaking down the lean muscle mass in your body, which causes your metabolism to be higher. So we don't want that. But eating enough carbs is important, because it also sends our brain the message that we've had enough food. So 8.5 slices of bread sounds alarming for people, but I will also say that 30 grams of carbohydrate would be equivalent to 1 large banana. So that gives some preference there. But really, if we begin looking at basic nutrition, 45 to 65% of our calories, our energy intake, is supposed to be coming from carbohydrate. Eating in the morning, honoring your hunger, always honor your hunger, and remembering that if we are constantly thinking about food, it probably means that we need more food. So responding, this is something that I like to talk about a lot. Responding comes from a place of choice and mindful awareness. Reacting comes from a place of habituation of what you're used to doing. So what we want to be doing when we think about emotions is learning how to be with our emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones. And I will say that a lot of times too, food is used to cope with emotions. All eating experience have emotion attached to them. And food is also comfort and joy for many, right? So however, when does it not feel okay? So as soon as it begins to not feel okay for you, emotional eating that is, that's when we begin looking at what's going on, or if food seems to be the only way of coping. So we begin to unravel food from feelings, and we begin naming our feelings and needs. So this is two questions that hopefully if you walk away from anything today, I do this all the time. It's one of my favorite things that I learned from Evelyn, and she always asks, what am I feeling right now? So actually naming the feeling, and then what do you need right now to respond to this feeling in a kind, caring, appropriate way. This does one of two things. It helps you connect with your experience in the moment and helps you respond to that experience in the moment. So it brings mindfulness and it brings attention and it brings autonomy to what it is that you're experiencing and how you want to respond. So again, we're just really cultivating this gentle awareness of what is going on for you. And also, if there's something that you don't like, I encourage you to think about what need is that behavior fulfilling for you, right? So we do things for reasons, and usually the things that we're doing is giving us something. So we have all these, oh, I eat too much, or I'm not eating enough, or I don't typically hear that, but that is actually most people's one of the things that is fueling a lot of this stuff. But thinking about for you, what is the behavior fulfilling and what is the need that's there? So really beginning to identify our needs and coming up with a way to cope with our emotions with kindness. So again, what am I feeling? What do I need to respond to this feeling? Now, I'm going to give you examples. I think that this helps bring the work to light, or some of it, but let's take this example of Sally. So Sally just got home from a horrible day at work. She wants to eat Domino's, Taco Bell, and ice cream from the fridge while watching her favorite show, Grey's Anatomy. I love Grey's Anatomy. I miss it right now. But Sally pauses and thinks about what she's actually feeling. So Sally realizes she's feeling anger, she's feeling depleted, and like she needs comfort. And she knows, she's taken the pause, that if she engages in her binge, she won't feel good after. So she recognizes her need is comfort. So she pauses and checks in with herself. She knows through work that she's done with her therapist and work that she's done in my office that baths are comforting to her. So she responds to her needs and feelings by taking a bath, putting on her favorite pair of comfy PJs, and making mac and cheese, her favorite comfort food, while watching her favorite show. So this is a beautiful way of being in attunement and also responding how she wants to respond, and getting her need met, what she was wanting to fulfill. So Ben just got a wave of hunger, and in turn a huge wave of anxiety. He doesn't want to eat because he is trying to lose weight. Even though he knows being hungry isn't good and dieting doesn't really work, his mind is telling him not to eat, but his body is screaming at him to eat. He pauses. This is something I do often. We want to dial down the voice on the dieting, disordered eating brain and increase the voice on the authentic self and what's important to him. So we want to dial down what's not important, increase what's important. He wants a healthy relationship with food. He knows his need is food, so he takes a few breaths and he decides to eat, right? Glenda is our final example here of identifying needs. Glenda has been on and off Weight Watchers since she was 13 years old. She started with her mom. She's now in her 60s and is still trying to lose weight. Since the age of 13, she's been on all sorts of diets and is so frustrated with herself. She hates her body. When asked by her dietitian what would be different if you were at your ideal weight, she cried and said, probably nothing, but I would feel more valued. Her need is feeling valued. She needs support around this. She makes an appointment with a therapist and begins exploring what would help her feel valued and like she was a part of something more. She then schedules to meet a non-diet dietitian to help her learn how to truly care for herself and her body. So hopefully those examples were helpful. Those are all examples that I have seen over the years, and it begins to bring to a beautiful idea of self-soothing, which I think is so apropos for what we are experiencing in the world right now. So self-soothing really is just a way for us to calm down and again to respond instead of react. And it just allows us to find a little more calm in times of distress, and with practice, the ability to make choices from a more mindful, responsive place instead of distractive, reactive place. So again, what am I feeling? Respond to the body cues or feelings in a calm state. So these are some of the things when I think of self-soothing. I encourage you to think about what does this look like for you. But if you're really just wanting to pause and check into how do you want to respond to what you're feeling inside your body right now, what does that look like? So it could be going for a walk, journaling, dancing, calling a friend, breathing, doing a chore, listening to a podcast. So just taking a little bit of time for yourself. This works fantastic also in arguments. So again, if you're having an argument with your spouse, or which can also happen more with all this time at home, but when times that we need to calm down so we can take care of ourselves and then respond. And this is especially important when it comes to challenging moments with food or body image or any of those pieces that we're thinking about. So one of the questions that I often get to is that, well, I have a medical condition and I can't eat certain foods. How am I supposed to eat? Right? So I want to say that when there are certain foods that you cannot eat, so I have a client and she has celiacs, and she truly cannot eat wheat products, or she can't eat gluten. So this work is not about, oh, I really want to eat bread, but it causes the villi in my gastrointestinal tract to decrease and I can't absorb nutrients. That's not healthy. That's not what I'm talking about here. So there's a difference between, caring for ourselves and then responding and typically coming at stuff from a place of choice. So what I'm saying is that with an example like that where you can't eat something, we want to recognize and we want to honor that. And typically there also has to do some making peace with that fact and finding other ways that you feel that you actually can find satisfaction with food. Like, what foods do you like then? Or still listening to those body cues. Body cues are always going to be there. Hunger, fullness, what sounds satisfying. Does your body need to move? Does it need to rest? What's going on for you there? One of the examples that I have is with cardiovascular disease and thinking about this. And so the two things that are most helpful actually in decreasing cardiovascular disease, the first thing is replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats like olive oils, avocados, and nuts. And then the second thing is also movement and exercise, and also stopping smoking, so smoking cessation. But when we have that information there, so we can still care for ourselves by knowing, okay, like these are the healthier fats for me to eat. How do I want to incorporate that into my care for myself? So it's coming from a real place of autonomy and choice instead of a place of having no choice and no autonomy, which is typically what happens when it comes to diet. So really coming at this from this place where we can still care for ourselves and also respect what it is that our body needs to thrive, and how we want to take care of ourselves. And diabetes here too, this is another one. So typically when I'm thinking about diabetes, I often see this in the world that people are just told to lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. Well, what if they can't because that's their natural body size, right? I mean, that happens. So how do we begin working with that? And so there are some ways that movement and exercise is a beautiful way, any type of movement that you like, is a beautiful way to help maintain regular blood sugar levels. Eating frequently throughout the day, that's actually huge for blood sugar stabilization, like food combining and having different food groups like proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. So there are ways that we can work with these medical conditions that require true care and consideration while still not having to go on this venture towards intentional weight loss, which can backfire and actually really disconnect us from our bodies. So I want you to know that it's not about not caring for ourselves, not paying attention to those things. Rather, it's working with those and choosing how it is that we want to respond. I should have had this previously in the other slide, but this is not something I made, but it's just a beautiful little, I think it's a nice little drawing of recognizing your need and then thinking about how you want to respond. So, right, it can be as simple as rest, relaxation. What does that look like? Taking a nap, watching favorite movie. So this is a beautiful example of attunement. So it's this idea, these are being able to tune into your needs and then responding to those needs. The same thing we see with food. So when we're hungry, we would eat. When we're full, we would stop. When we're wanting something crunchy to eat, if it's there and available, maybe we get something crunchy to eat. So really connecting with our internal worlds, our internal selves, and responding to that information in a kind, caring, internally regulated, intuitive way. So I finished right on the dot. I wanted to, this is my information. I will open it up just in a minute with questions. These are the references that that for today's presentation. And then the other thing that I just wanted to share here before we open it up is that this is the book. This is the new edition that is coming out, but it's a wonderful book that you can read and check out. If you haven't, it's available on Amazon. It's like $14, but it is a wonderful, wonderful book. And then the other piece is that there's a little self-care assessment here. I know that we're in COVID, so this question, how often do you get together with friends, may be a little challenging, but it may just be helpful to go through and think about on your own what comes up. So, and that now we're back. Now we're here. So, oh, sorry, Miriam asked a question, but oh, Jen says, thank you for giving me permission to snack. Yes, snacking is really actually good, especially if you're hungry. So that's an important part. Any questions or comments? I know that there was a lot of information or things that seemed radically different for you. I'd love to hear. I'd love to open it up to a conversation. Or if you want to type in, maybe we'll want to unmute people. I'll unmute everyone. Okay, so is that okay, Shannon?
Yes, absolutely.
Jen, thank you.
Corinne?
Yes.
This is Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Hi.
Yes.
So I am jumping ahead a little bit, but I found this information just so valuable, and I will be purchasing the book.
Oh, good.
It's so are you open to working with people, or you've got a pretty full schedule, don't you? Especially with a little one running around.
I do work with individuals. Yes. So yes. And I don't know if anyone is interested, but I don't know if this attunes to you, but I do work with individuals, and I often run groups too. So I do those two things, and they're on my website.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And I will share too that there is an intuitive eating workbook that I have had some clients go through that, and I've led intuitive eating groups, and I've had people do the workbooks together. So some of this is just really helpful to process with another person. And it's really especially, whether it's your therapist or, I mean, not everybody's finances, especially today, look different, but the processing piece is really interesting for many. Yeah. Or, that I do with people. So there's many different pieces, but yeah.
I'll go to your website.
Question, do you feel like I can stick to things if I have a menu kind of planned out for, say, a few days? But if I don't, then I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to eat. And I just, jump around, and that's where I feel like I get out of control.
Oh, so it feels good for you to have some planning ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And is your question my take on that?
Yeah. I mean, isn't that kind of common, or is that uncommon to be that planned? I mean, because you say eat when you feel like it, eat what you want, but then,
Beautiful point, Gretchen. You're getting into the nitty-gritty stuff. So what I'm going to say is that I'm hearing that it's helpful for you. So that's wonderful. And that if that's helpful and helping you feel connected and more calm, then that's great. I think it also comes around the intention behind it. If you're having to follow this meal plan because you're hoping to, I don't know, it feels like you're losing your autonomy, but you're the one doing it, that's very different. I would say my interpretation of that is it's coming from a helping place, a place of self-care. And that is, I'm hearing you say, helping you decrease your anxiety around what you should be eating. So I think with all of this, I tend to approach this that you are your own expert of your body. I have no idea what is best for you, and you meaning that that feels caring, then that's a wonderful thing to do. And I think the other thing that I want to say here is that I often work with individuals with disordered eating or chronic diet or eating disorders, and sometimes there is creating of a meal plan and eating pattern and schedule to help your body get connected back to those cues, because if it's been really erratic, then it's impossible to eat when you're hungry or stop when you're full. Because if you don't have that hunger cue and it's been 8 hours, am I going to tell you not to eat? No, that's not self-care. So sometimes we just have to eat anyway out of self-care. So there's a lot of nuances to this whole practice. And I really just gave the big kind of overview picture. And you may hear this, somebody else give a talk on intuitive eating and be like, that's not what I thought, or, so there's so many different pieces, but I want to encourage you to do what feels good for you. And that may be fun to kind of begin noticing, well, what do you actually want to add in the menu? How did that food keep you satisfied for that long? So does that make sense, or is that helpful?
Oh, yes. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I'm Maureen.
Oh, hi, Maureen.
I kind of can get into this if I'm on my own, but when you've got other people in your family, my husband and I are never on the same intuitive schedule, and we really do want to have a meal together. So that, to me, is the biggest challenge, is when we're going to eat together and when we're going to satisfy our own separate needs.
Oh gosh. Yeah. that is a big piece that comes into it. I would encourage you to think about, and I think that this is where, are you saying that there's different times you guys are on different eating schedules
It's not so bad now that we're both pretty much at home, but typically when we're, normal times, we're on different schedules. I might have a meeting here and we try to inform each other. Okay, so we've done this so many times. Well, we really want to eat, because we're a little older now, we want to eat quite a few hours before we go to bed. So, well, let's plan on having our main meal sort of around early afternoon and then we can do whatever we want later on when we feel, each one of us. So, we've tried to do that. It hardly ever works out. The thing is, you try to do that, but then your schedules are there. Who's going to make this, nice dinner at 2 p.m. or whatever, when we're both in the middle doing something else. So it's been a little bit challenging that way, I think, or even if you had a family with children that are on different schedules and things like that, that part I think is pretty challenging.
Yeah, the different schedules of people. I'm curious. What do you think would be the most helpful for you?
Well, I think we do a pretty good job of planning, okay, what do we both feel like eating tonight? Because we're not going to make two separate things. So, when you're not living alone, can do whatever you want, eat what you want, when you want it, and you want to eat a meal together with your family, then it takes a little bit more planning. What do you think? It's a little bit more compromise, I think. Maybe I feel like eating barbecue and he wants to have pasta. So how do we have to resolve that and compromise.
Okay. So this is more, so I'm saying, I think that you have a pretty good, what I'm hearing you say, I'm giving you full permission to realize that there is a compromise in what you're doing right now. It sounds like it's working for you.
Sort of.
Now and then. Well, I'm
times where I say, I really don't feel like eating right now. So I eat a very little bit and then later on I'm really hungry. So.
Okay. So now and
then I'm really hungry. So.
Okay.
I eat just a little bit of my dinner. Like tonight, I did eat earlier because for me, later on after this would be too late for me to digest and go to bed because I'm older and my systems are not working so well anymore.
Yeah.
So I like to eat well before I go to bed. So I just left half of mine to eat later because there's no way I could eat it all then.
Yeah. Well, I want to say I'm hearing two things. The first thing I'm hearing is that you know your system and you know your body pretty well. And the other thing that I'm hearing is that there seems to be a little bit of challenge for you because the times maybe that what you want to have is not what you're actually eating, or the times that you're eating are different than you're recognizing yet you're actually hungry. So you're trying to figure out how do you be with your husband and be on different wavelengths.
Yeah, you have to be a little proactive, I think. And I think, I don't remember the lady's name, about the planning, I think.
Gretchen, yes.
Has to be part of, you have to plan a little bit, at least to some degree. And
Absolutely.
Then I think it works better if you plan.
Yes. And I think that you're getting at this phase that this isn't black or white, and this is incredibly kind of nuanced, and there's no right or wrong. And I think that you have a beginning to kind of find a pattern for you want to eat with your husband, but you're not actually hungry. Maybe you have a little bit of food, and maybe you don't. Maybe you have maybe you eat when you're actually hungry and you sit with him. I mean, so it's kind of this moving piece. I'm curious for anybody, there are other people listening, but as you're listening to this conversation, does anybody want to add anything into what you found works for you or what's coming up for you?
I'm always hungry, so I eat whenever Kim wants to and whenever I'm still hungry.
Okay. And how does that work for you guys? Or for you? For both of you?
She looks great and I'm gaining weight.
Okay. So there's this, so you can recognize.
Weight that much, but anyway.
Yeah. When it comes to all these different pieces, planning is helpful in this. Knowing your body and the information is helpful. And I think that the biggest piece that you can do in all of this work is just listen to those body cues on your own, and then figure out what in your external world do you need to shift, or do you want to have be known so you can better take care of yourself. And that requires sometimes a lot of exploration and experiments to see what feels best for you. So I know that we're not coming to any conclusions here, but I want to just encourage you to continue listening to those cues and playing around with how do you want to respond to them.
Thank you.
Gretchen had to left to go meet her friends who's at her door. Anything else coming up? Any other questions? Or I'm curious, what was maybe the most helpful from today?
For me, I think it was that recognition and mindfulness and the pausing, saying, especially now that we're wandering around looking for things to do and passing by the refrigerator, and I'm just saying, okay, do I really need to open and see what's in the refrigerator right now? Is that necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Or I feel that I need to do that. Sometimes we're just doing it mindlessly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Jane. I think that pausing was what was really helpful for me. And I think kind of in the middle of a meal, just pausing, and because I probably am satisfied and could stop, but I'll keep eating and probably be a little more than just full.
Yeah. It's a great tool to just even begin thinking about, where are you on that hunger scale periodically throughout the day, or what are you feeling in your body? Like, what do you need? And they sound so simple, but the more you kind of begin doing that, it's really, really interesting.
So I think that things have changed a little bit since, I don't know, it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago probably that I came to a little seminar or group of classes that you did over here.
Oh, yeah.
And that was I'll come to your house and clean out your cupboards and get rid of everything. Is that sort of what your old kind of thought process was? And now it's just get stuff.
It was more detox.
It was more detox type of.
Okay. Gosh. Well, I've never done detoxes, and I've never cleaned out anybody's cupboards, but I get to what it is that you're saying. The approach, I think, for the first 2.5 years, which is when I met Shannon, and that was like, that was like 10 to 8.5 years ago. That was working with people in a very weight normative way. And that was something that was never helpful. And I think that's what you begin seeing, because you're trying to have people, you focus on just the size of one's body, yet that's not really about the health of one's body. So yeah, there's a big, thank you for sharing that. It just takes me back to like, what was I doing? But yeah, that was, it takes me back so long ago, and it feels so, I'm so grateful that I don't do any of that work now. I don't do any weight loss. I don't do anything around that. And because I can't tell you if you're going to lose weight or not. Like, either when you begin doing this work and you change health behaviors, your weight's going to do one of three things: go up, down, or stay the same. And so I'll tell you that my training, I had never even heard of like a weight inclusive intuitive eating approach. And I came from a very much of a medical background, and actually being in the field for like 2.5 years doing that, just like doing that work. I actually stopped all my stuff then and took a break off and worked under nutrition communications as I was building new skills, and took a break and almost left the field as a dietitian because I became so disenchanted from the weight industry and from the marketing, and it just began breaking my heart. And so I'm so grateful actually that you shared that, because it's like, oh my God, if I was doing that just ethically too, it's really nice. It's like, it's a little embarrassing. I'm embarrassed as you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass.
No, but it's for me, even just recognizing that, like, but yeah, it's been my career has been vastly changed over the last, since I started over the last like 10 years. So yeah, it's a much different approach, and I feel so much more aligned with it. So thank you. Yeah. For bringing me to my, for being real, and also for thinking about all the shifts. So yeah, and Shannon has seen it all. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody else have any other questions or closing comments? Anything, reflections on Corinne's talk, or anything that came up that you'd like to add?
Thank you so much, Corinne. It really resonated for me because of the work that I do, but more so my own personal journey. So really, I'll take it offline. So much to say. I was glued to the telephone. So I really appreciate it, Shannon. It's some.
Miriam, I think we're having some connectivity issues. We can't hear what you're saying, but definitely the gist of it in terms of how her message resonated with you, and I know that it definitely resonated with me too. Are you back?
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
My phone was going down in battery. No, I just what you said. It just totally resonated with me. Like I said, both professionally and personally. I was kind of, glued. I'm already kind of looking into doing a certification process, but this was definitely amazing.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for sharing that and for coming.
Well, Corinne, I want to thank you. It's interesting. I am familiar with intuitive eating. However, I think you just really did a great job pulling it together. And even personally, I always get something out of it that I can, I think just be kinder, more gentler, and listening to my body a little more as well when it comes to food. So anyway, thank you. And thank you, my dear Round Hill Country Club friends. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening tonight. And I will see some of you in class tomorrow.
Thanks, Janet.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, Jen.